My family stormed into my office claiming I ruined everything by stopping financial support for my golden child brother, called me a failure in front of my manager, and demanded I transfer cash, so I fled the office and burned all bridges. They couldn't even imagine what I came up with next. Sup Reddit, my name is Tyler, and I'm 30 years old. For most of my adult life, I've been living what most people would call the dream. I'm successful both financially and personally, with the kind of lifestyle that looks perfect from the outside. Basically that Instagram-worthy existence that everyone seems to want these days. I moved to Tampa several years back, and I've never regretted that decision for a single moment. This city, with its endless sunshine and beautiful Gulf beaches, is the perfect match for my lifestyle. There's something about waking up to constant warmth and being able to hit the beach whenever I want that just works for me. I work as a graphic designer for a major agency, and I'm making solid money that allows me to live very comfortably. I've got a place in a prestigious neighborhood, drive a nice car, and never have to make compromises on the good stuff in life. It's the kind of financial stability that actually lets you sleep at night, knowing your bills are covered and your future feels secure. For the past 4 years, I've been consistently crushing my project deadlines. It's the kind of stable career that gives you real peace of mind. Recently, I even landed this massive automotive client, and the commission structure was absolutely insane. We're talking about bonuses that could buy a decent used car every single quarter. Things were looking incredibly bright on the professional front. Oh, and I have Max, my 3-year-old German Shepherd mix who's basically a furry tornado with severe separation anxiety. This dog has the intelligence of a brick when it suits him, but he's also somehow incredibly clever when he wants to be. Just this morning, I caught him trying to bury his breakfast kibble in the couch cushions, apparently convinced that my living room had transformed into some kind of Arctic wilderness that required food storage preparation. Now let me paint you a picture of my family situation, because this is where things get complicated. My parents run this hardware store that they like to call Wilson Hardware and Supply. They act like it's some kind of generational empire that's been passed down through the ages, but the truth is, it's basically a glorified hobby shop that's been bleeding money since Bush was in office. The only reason this place has survived at all is because of my monthly contributions, which started as helping them with a business loan cosign when I was 26 and somehow evolved into permanent financial life support. Then there's my brother Kevin, who's 27 years old and has basically turned professional victimhood into an art form. He dropped out of college during his junior year because, according to him, his professors didn't understand his creative vision. Since then, he's bounced between jobs like a pinball barista, yoga instructor, Instagram wellness coach, you name it. He's tried it and quit it. Currently, he works part-time at some crystals and sage shop downtown, and his longest employment streak was a whopping 5 months. My best friend Derek put it perfectly when he said, "Dude, your brother sells rocks to Karens and calls it spirituality. That's not a job, that's a participation trophy with extra steps." I couldn't have described it better myself. Here's where the situation gets really good, though. Kevin lives in a $2,800 per month loft in the trendy district because, according to him, he needs to be surrounded by positive energy for his spiritual growth. Meanwhile, this guy makes maybe $900 a month selling overpriced rocks to soccer moms who are having midlife crises. I'll let you do the math on that financial equation, because it certainly doesn't add up to anything resembling sustainability. For years, I've been the family safety net. It was always the same story. Car payments behind, can you help out just this once? Or, rent's short this month, family emergency, we'll pay you back, I promise. There was always a security deposit needed for a new place after Kevin got evicted from the previous one. They kept telling me it was an investment in his future, and I kept telling myself it was temporary, that eventually they'd all get their act together and stop needing my constant financial intervention. The wake-up call came exactly 4 months ago when my dad hit me with one of those phone calls. You know the type. It started with his usual, "Hey champ, got a minute?" Which I'd learned over the years was basically code for empty your wallet because we're about to ask for money again. It turns out mom and dad were having what they called cash flow issues and needed me to take over Kevin's rent completely. Not temporarily, not just for a few months until he got back on his feet, permanently. When I hesitated for even a moment, Dad launched into his usual guilt trip. "He's family," Dad said with that tone he uses when he's trying to sound wise and paternal. "This is what family does. We take care of each other." I asked the obvious question. Why couldn't Kevin just move somewhere cheaper, somewhere that actually fit within his ridiculously limited budget? Dad's response was classic. "He's not built like you. Some people are warriors, Others need protection. You're the warrior. During this entire conversation, Max was in the background having a full dramatic meltdown because his favorite tennis ball had rolled under the couch. The howling and carrying on was so loud that Dad actually asked if someone was being murdered in my apartment. Looking back, I can see this was just classic manipulation tactics. Make me feel special and important while simultaneously guilting me into compliance. When I told him I needed some time to think about it, Mom grabbed the phone and really laid on the emotional blackmail thick. "We sacrificed so much to give you opportunities," she said, her voice dripping with wounded martyrdom. "Now you won't help your own brother? What kind of son are we raising here?" I called Derek immediately to vent about the whole situation, and his response was immediate and brutal. "Bro, your parents run a failing hardware store and want you to subsidize your brother's crystal meth business. I mean, crystal meditation business. That's not family values, that's a pyramid scheme with feelings." I was starting to think maybe I was wrong about the whole situation, that maybe I was being too harsh. But then, just 4 days later, Kevin called me directly with his own sob story about how his landlord was supposedly targeting him and threatening eviction. He needed $5,200 immediately, current month's rent plus late fees, plus next month's rent in advance as some kind of security measure. When I told him I couldn't just drop $5,000 on a random Wednesday, he said something that still pisses me off to this day. "I guess I know where I stand with you now. When I'm homeless, I'll remember this conversation. Don't expect me to forget who was there for me and who wasn't." That's when I realized this wasn't actually about helping family members who were going through a rough patch. This was about enabling a grown man's complete refusal to live within his means, while my parents played the victim and made me out to be the bad guy for having any boundaries whatsoever. So I told them all no, and that's when the real fun started. Saying no to my family was like kicking a hornet's nest. Within 24 hours, the guilt trip campaign was in full swing, and these people had turned emotional manipulation into an absolute art form. It started with my mom calling me at work, not my personal phone, but my office landline. She had somehow managed to get the number and decided to call during my busiest project week. She was sobbing about how I was abandoning the family in their darkest hour, and her voice was so loud that my coworker Janet could hear her from 3 cubicles away. Janet kept asking if everything was okay with my mom, which was mortifying. The timing was absolutely perfect, of course. I was juggling 3 major client campaigns and prepping for quarterly reviews, and here was my mother turning my office into a Jerry Springer episode. The automotive client campaign that I'd worked 7 months on was hanging in the balance, and my boss kept walking by while Mom was having her emotional breakdown through my work phone. It was career suicide material right there. Then came the text bombardment. Dad started sending me articles about successful people who had forgotten their roots, and stories about children who had abandoned their parents in their time of need. Mom was forwarding me GoFundMe links for families facing homelessness with messages like, "I pray we never need to resort to this," attached to each one. Kevin was sending me screenshots of what he claimed were eviction notices, though they looked suspiciously generic. But the real creativity came when they started calling my office pretending to be potential clients. I caught on when someone calling himself Mr. Johnson asked about our family loyalty discount packages. Real subtle, Mom. Derek's take when I showed him all the text was perfect. "Your family group chat looks like a Nigerian prince scam had a baby with a Lifetime movie. This is weapons-grade manipulation, dude." The psychological warfare really ramped up when they started involving other people in their campaign. Suddenly, every family gathering became an intervention. Uncle Marcus would casually mention, "Your dad said you're going through a selfish phase." Cousin Lisa would ask, "Your mom seems really stressed lately. Is everything okay?" They even recruited my 85-year-old Grandma Wilson to call and ask why I wasn't helping my brother in his time of need. But the real escalation came 3 weeks later during our monthly family dinner. I showed up thinking maybe we could work things out like adults and have a reasonable conversation. Instead, I walked straight into what can only be described as an ambush. Mom had somehow gotten hold of my bank statements, probably from tax season when I'd let her help with paperwork, and she'd printed them out and calculated exactly how much she thought I could afford to give Kevin. "You spend $220 a month on that gym membership," she said, waving the papers around like evidence in a courtroom. "You could cancel that and help your brother instead. Look at this: Netflix, Spotify, even your car payment. You have choices to make here." Dad chimed in with his favorite guilt trip. "We never asked you for anything growing up. The least you can do is help when we're struggling. When I pointed out that I'd been sending them money for 5 years straight, Dad just dismissed it with a wave of his hand. That's different, he insisted. The store is an investment. This is family. When I suggested that maybe Kevin should consider getting a full-time job, Mom's voice went ice cold. Not everyone can be as heartless as you've become, she said. Some people have feelings. Some people care about more than money. The dinner ended with Kevin dramatically storming out, declaring, I can't believe this. I thought family meant something. I guess I was wrong about you. Mom followed him, shooting me a look like I'd personally ruined Christmas. Dad just shook his head and said, I don't know what happened to you, son. You used to care about this family. Driving home that night, I realized something had fundamentally shifted. These weren't the people who had raised me, or maybe they were, and I'd just been too blind to see it clearly. Either way, I was done being their personal safety net. When I got home, Max was waiting by the door with what I can only describe as a guilty expression. It turns out he'd somehow managed to get into the kitchen cabinet and had eaten an entire bag of dog treats, then thrown up on my carpet in a perfect circle, like some kind of ritualistic offering. The vet bill from his stomach pump ended up costing more than what Kevin makes in a week. But they weren't done with me, not even close. The breaking point came 7 weeks later, and it was so insane that I still can't believe it actually happened. I was at work leading a presentation for our biggest client, a tech startup looking to rebrand their entire image. This was absolutely huge for me personally. My boss had basically told me that if this went well, I'd be looking at a promotion and a significant raise. It was one of those career-defining moments that you spend years working toward. The conference room was packed with my entire team, the clients, and even some executives from our parent company who had flown in specifically for this meeting. We're talking about 15 people in suits, all there to see what I'd been working on for months. I was 25 minutes into my presentation, really hitting my stride and feeling confident about how it was going, when our receptionist, Linda, burst through the door, looking absolutely terrified. I'm sorry to interrupt, she said, but there's a family emergency. Your parents are here and they say it's urgent. Before I could even process what she'd said or figure out how to respond, my mom and dad pushed past her into the conference room. Not the hallway, not my cubicle, the actual conference room where I'm presenting to 15 people in business suits. There you are, Mom screamed, pointing at me like I was some kind of fugitive she'd been hunting down. How dare you ignore your family when we're in crisis? The room went completely dead silent. My client, this polished CEO in his 60s who'd seen everything in business, looked like he was watching a nature documentary about unhinged relatives. Dad started yelling about how I'd turned my back on my blood and forgotten where I came from. But here's the part that still makes my blood boil when I think about it. Mom looked directly at my boss and said, This boy owes his family money. We raised him, fed him, clothed him, and now he thinks he's too good to help his brother avoid homelessness. Maybe you need to know what kind of person you're employing. My boss, this distinguished guy who'd been mentoring me for 3 years, just stared in complete shock as my mother actively tried to sabotage my career in real time. She actually turned to him and said, You should garnish his wages. Teach him about family responsibility. We know exactly how much he makes. Ma'am, this is highly inappropriate, my boss started to say, but Dad cut him off immediately. Inappropriate? Dad shot back. What's inappropriate is a son abandoning his family. We're not leaving until this gets resolved. I stood there watching my professional reputation disintegrate while my parents put on a performance for people I respected and had worked years to impress. The client kept checking his watch, clearly wanting to escape this nightmare. My team looked mortified, and Linda was literally wringing her hands by the door like she was watching a car accident in slow motion. That's when something inside me just snapped. I looked at my boss, apologized to the client, and walked out. I just left mid-presentation, my career potentially in ruins, but I couldn't stay in that room for another second. The aftermath was absolutely brutal. 4 years of relationship building with this client, gone. My team had to scramble to salvage the presentation without me. The executives from corporate were asking questions about workplace security protocols. I spent the rest of the day sitting in my car in the parking garage, fielding calls from HR about the incident and wondering if I still had a job. My boss eventually called and said we'd discuss it later, which in corporate speak usually means update your resume. The client ended up walking away from the deal entirely. We're talking about 8 months of work down the drain, a $2.7 million campaign that would have set my career trajectory for the next 6 years. Instead, I got to explain to my team why our biggest pitch meeting had turned into family therapy. But the harassment wasn't over, not by a long shot. That evening, Kevin showed up at my apartment. I should have seen it coming, but I was completely drained from the office disaster. When I opened the door, he looked uncharacteristically put together. Hair done, wearing the kind of outfit he usually saves for job interviews he never gets. "We need to talk," he said, pushing past me without any invitation. Max, being the brilliant guard dog that he is, immediately rolled over and showed Kevin his belly, tail wagging like he was greeting his long-lost best friend. Real intimidating, buddy. For the next 2 hours, Kevin deployed every manipulation tactic in the book. He started with fake concern. "This isn't like you. Maybe you're having some kind of breakdown." When I said I was fine, he switched tactics immediately. "Do you know what it's like watching mom cry every night because her son won't help his own brother? She keeps asking where she went wrong. Maybe she should ask where she went wrong when she raised a 27-year-old who can't pay his own rent," I said. Kevin's eyes flashed with anger. "You think you're so much better than us, don't you? Just because you have some corporate job, you think you're above family." When that didn't work, he switched to gaslighting. "You're remembering things wrong about helping us. You're being dramatic about what happened at your office. You used to be the brother who'd do anything for the family." But the mask really slipped when he realized none of this was working. "You know what? Fine. Be selfish. But don't come crawling back when you realize you need us more than we need you." He stood up, smoothed his shirt, and delivered the final blow. "By the way, Mom and Dad are telling everyone what happened at your office today. About how you embarrassed them in front of your coworkers. They're posting it on Facebook to show what kind of son they have." The second he left, Max started howling like someone had died. I'm talking full-on werewolf mode, head thrown back, dramatic as hell. My neighbors probably thought I was torturing him. Turns out he'd been holding it the entire time Kevin was there. Really needed to pee, but was too polite to interrupt the family drama. After Kevin left, I called Derek immediately to tell him about the whole insane evening. His response after hearing the entire story was perfect. "Dude, your brother just went full Amber Heard in your living room. The only thing missing was him taking a shit on your couch. Time to lawyer up and ghost these psychos." After he left, I sat in my apartment staring at the walls, finally understanding what I was really dealing with. These weren't people having a rough patch who needed temporary help. They were emotional terrorists who saw me as nothing more than a resource to exploit. And they had just threatened to destroy my reputation if I didn't comply with their demands. The Facebook post was a completely different story entirely. Mom had written this whole elaborate sob story about having to beg her own son for help while he lived in luxury and ignored his family's suffering. She painted me as some heartless corporate drone who had forgotten his roots and abandoned his brother in his time of need. The post included specific details about my salary, my apartment, even my car information she'd gathered during years of me being completely transparent about my finances because I trusted them. She made it sound like I was hoarding wealth while my family literally starved, conveniently leaving out the 5 years of business support and countless emergency payments I'd made over the years. The comments section was absolutely brutal. Family friends I'd known since childhood were calling me selfish and ungrateful. Distant relatives were sharing their own stories about kids these days who don't respect family values. She had even tagged my high school classmates in the post, ensuring maximum humiliation and social damage. Derek's comment when he saw the post was gold. "Yo, your mom just aired out your business like she's running for mayor of Pettytown. This is some next-level social media warfare. She tagged half the phone book in this thing." But the real gut punch came when my boss called me into his office that afternoon. Someone had apparently shared the post with our HR department. Mr. Collins looked uncomfortable as he explained that while they couldn't fire me for family drama, the client from yesterday's presentation had expressed concerns about our company culture and my personal stability. "I'm going to be straight with you," he said, looking genuinely sympathetic but also concerned. "This reflects poorly on all of us. Maybe you should consider taking some time off to get your personal life sorted out. Corporate speak for, 'You're toxic now, please disappear for a while.'" That's when I realized I had exactly 2 choices. Let them destroy me piece by piece, systematically dismantling everything I'd worked for, or burn it all down and start over somewhere completely fresh. The decision was actually easier than I'd expected. I called Professor Thompson that night, my old business ethics teacher, who'd always said his door was open for graduates who needed advice or connections. Turns out he had connections at a firm 4 hours away that was looking for someone with exactly my experience. Better pay, full remote option, and they needed someone immediately. The new company was everything my old job wasn't. They actually valued work-life balance instead of just putting it in their mission statement as meaningless corporate speak. The base salary was 45% higher plus equity options, the kind of opportunity you don't pass up when it falls into your lap. Within 48 hours, I had a solid job offer. Within a week, I'd found an apartment in a different city. By the end of the month, I was completely gone. But before I left, I made one last trip to Wilson Hardware and Supply. I needed to see exactly what kind of operation I'd been funding all these years with my monthly contributions. The store was an absolute mess, half-empty shelves, dust everywhere, inventory that looked like it hadn't moved since the Clinton administration. There were random boxes of screws and bolts mixed with outdated power tools and paint cans with rust rings around the bottom. It was exactly the kind of failing business I'd suspected it was. That afternoon, I started making the phone calls that would change everything. First to their accountant, explaining that I was removing myself from all business obligations effective immediately. Then to their web hosting company, credit card processors, and every other service I'd set up for them over the years. Meanwhile, I had to figure out what to do with Max for the move. This dog had never been more than an hour away from me since I got him, and now I was planning to drive 4 hours to a completely new city. I decided to do a test run to the new apartment, which turned out to be a big mistake. Max spent the entire car ride doing his impression of a dying whale, complete with dramatic sighs and the occasional accusatory glare through the rearview mirror, like I was personally betraying everything he held sacred. If they wanted to play hardball, I'd show them what hardball actually looked like. Going ghost was actually the easy part, deleting social media accounts, moving to a city where nobody knew my family's drama. That just required logistics and money, both of which I had plenty of. The best part was watching them slowly realize what they'd actually lost, while I genuinely didn't care anymore. My new job was everything the old one wasn't: flexible schedule, respectful colleagues, and a boss who understood that work-life balance isn't just a meaningless buzzword you put on company websites. For the first time in years, I wasn't constantly stressed about money because I wasn't constantly bleeding cash to other people's manufactured emergencies. Max adapted to the new apartment by immediately claiming the entire living room as his personal kingdom. I came home from my first week of work to find that he'd rearranged all the couch cushions into what I can only describe as a fort, and was sitting in the middle of it looking incredibly proud of his architectural achievement. He'd also somehow figured out how to open the sliding door to the balcony, and had been conducting what appeared to be diplomatic negotiations with a neighborhood cat through the screen. But the real satisfaction came from watching Wilson Hardware and Supply implode in slow motion. You see, when I'd set up their digital infrastructure back in 2021, I'd done it right. Professional email hosting, e-commerce platform, payment processing, inventory management, social media automation. Their entire modern operation ran through systems I controlled and paid for. They'd gotten comfortable letting me handle all the computer stuff while they focused on what they considered the important business decisions. The technical side was actually more complex than they realized. I'd integrated everything so it all worked together seamlessly. Their point-of-sale system talked to inventory management, which updated the website automatically. Customer orders triggered supplier notifications. It was a beautiful, interconnected system that required actual technical knowledge to maintain. Cutting off the money was just the beginning. 4 weeks after I disappeared, I started receiving panicked voicemails from Dad's new burner phone. Yes, he actually bought one after I blocked their regular numbers. Apparently, contractors were complaining that bulk orders placed through their website weren't being fulfilled. Their payment processor had suspended their account due to irregular activity patterns. Their business email was bouncing messages back to senders. The best part? I hadn't actually sabotaged anything. I just stopped maintaining systems they didn't understand how to operate. When you don't know how to log into your own email hosting account, and the person who set it up disappears, things fall apart naturally. Kevin, meanwhile, was discovering what real responsibility felt like. With their website down and their main phone number disconnected, I'd forgotten to pay that bill. Oops. Contractors and DIY customers started calling his personal cell phone looking for answers. The guy who could barely handle working part-time was suddenly fielding calls from confused contractors asking about missing shipments of lumber and screws, and angry suppliers demanding payment for delivered goods. One voicemail I heard about through the grapevine had Kevin telling a contractor, Look, I don't know anything about your stupid screws, okay? My brother handled all the computer stuff and he abandoned us. Figure it out yourself. Derek's reaction when I told him about this was perfect. Your brother went from selling crystals to explaining missing hardware shipments. That's like asking a vegan to run a steakhouse. This is beautiful chaos, man. Through mutual friends, I heard Kevin tried calling other family members for help. Uncle Marcus's response was, "Call your brother. He knows about computer stuff." Cousin Lisa told him, "Maybe you should get a real job and fix this yourself." Even Grandma Wilson apparently told him to stop depending on others and figure it out. The Facebook post that was supposed to destroy my reputation had backfired spectacularly. People started asking uncomfortable questions about why a 27-year-old needed his brother to pay his rent, and why parents would humiliate their son at his workplace over money. The narrative flipped from ungrateful son abandons family to grown adults can't function without financial enabler. But my parents' real panic started when the IRS audit letter arrived. Remember how I'd been co-signing business loans and having my name on various accounts? When I formally removed myself from everything and their CPA filed the updated paperwork, it triggered automatic reviews. Turns out claiming employee payroll for people who don't exist and getting loans under false pretenses gets federal attention really quickly. Dad's voicemail from that day was pure desperation. "Son, please call me back. We can work this out. There's been a misunderstanding with the government, and they're asking questions about you. We need to talk immediately. This affects all of us." When I didn't respond, the next message was, "Tyler, how can you do this to your own family? The government is harassing us because of something you did. You owe us at least an explanation. A misunderstanding, right? Like accidentally committing tax fraud is something that just happens to good people." I didn't call back, but I did contact a lawyer to make sure I was protected from whatever mess they'd created. Turns out documenting everything before cutting ties was the smartest move I'd ever made. That night, Max somehow managed to get his head stuck in an empty peanut butter jar. I have no idea how he even got it. I don't keep peanut butter that low, and the jar was completely clean. It was like he'd performed some kind of magic trick just to give me something else to worry about. I spent 25 minutes with dish soap trying to get him unstuck while he looked at me with those judgmental eyes. Like this was somehow my fault. 5 months into my new life, I was absolutely thriving while my old family imploded spectacularly. The best part was watching it all unfold through the family grapevine without having to deal with any of it directly. The IRS audit had revealed enough irregularities to trigger a full investigation. Not only had they been claiming fake employees and inflating business expenses, but they'd also been using my social security number on documents I'd never signed. My lawyer called it identity theft with intent to defraud the federal government, which sounds exactly as serious as it actually is. Wilson Hardware and Supply officially closed in April. Not temporarily shuttered for renovations like they kept telling people on social media, but actually done finished, kaput. The landlord had locked them out after 5 months of unpaid rent, and the state revoked their business license after the tax issues came to light. 22 years of what they called family legacy was gone because they couldn't function without their personal ATM. Dad was working part-time at Home Depot now, which honestly might have been the first legitimate job he'd had since the Reagan administration. The irony of him working for a big box hardware store after claiming his small business was so important wasn't lost on anyone who knew the situation. Mom got hired at a call center, but got fired 4 weeks later for attitude issues. Apparently, she kept telling customers they were being unreasonable for expecting her to solve their problems. Turns out treating strangers like emotional punching bags doesn't work in customer service. Who could have predicted that? The financial devastation was complete. They'd lost the store, the house, their credit rating, and their reputation in the community. Local contractors who had dealt with them for years were sharing their own horror stories about late deliveries and unpaid invoices. Derek's take on Dad's new job was perfect. Your dad went from owning a hardware store to being a Home Depot employee. That's like Gordon Ramsay ending up as a McDonald's cashier. The poetry writes itself. The house went up for sale in May. Turns out when you lose your primary income source and face significant IRS penalties, keeping a 5-bedroom mortgage becomes impossible. They'd moved in with Uncle Marcus temporarily, which must have been awkward since Marcus had been one of the flying monkeys telling me I should help them. But Kevin's situation was the most satisfying to watch. His landlord had finally evicted him after months of unpaid rent, and none of his extended guilt trip network stepped up with $2,800 a month to keep him in the trendy district. He'd moved back home with Mom and Dad just in time to be homeless with them when they lost the house. Last I heard, he was living in Uncle Marcus's basement and working full-time for the first time in his adult life, overnight shifts at a 24-hour diner. Apparently, being surrounded by positive energy was less important when faced with actual homelessness. According to my cousin Nathan, the family group chat had become a constant stream of drama and blame. One exchange he shared was typical. Kevin texting, "This is all your fault for not supporting me when I needed it," to which Mom replied, "We gave you everything and this is how you repay us." And Dad chiming in with, "If your brother hadn't abandoned us, none of this would have happened." Uncle Marcus eventually kicked them out after 7 weeks. His final words to them, according to Nathan, were, "I'm not running a charity for grown adults who refuse to take responsibility for their own lives." Max had his own opinion about the family drama. Every time I got an update from Nathan, Max would start howling along to whatever music was playing, like he was providing emotional commentary. Last week it was "My Heart Will Go On" by Celine Dion. The timing was perfect. Right when Nathan told me about Kevin's diner job, Max hit those high notes like he was mourning the death of Kevin's spiritual wellness career. Word was spreading through the extended family about what had really happened. The Facebook post that was supposed to make me look bad was still up, and people were reading it differently now. Comments like, "Maybe he should get a job," and "Sounds like you raised your kids to be dependent," weren't exactly the support they'd expected. But the real validation came from an unexpected source. Professor Thompson called to check on how the new job was going, and mentioned he'd been contacted by someone claiming to be my father. Dad had somehow tracked down my old advisor and tried to get him to talk sense into me about family responsibility. According to Professor Thompson, Dad had said, "My son has lost his way. He's forgotten what family means. Maybe you can remind him that blood is thicker than water." Professor Thompson's response was perfect. "Your son is one of the most responsible young men I've ever taught. If he cut contact with you, I'm sure you earned it." That's when I knew I'd made the right choice. These people had spent months trying to destroy my reputation, manipulate everyone around me, and paint themselves as victims. But the truth has a way of coming out, and people aren't as stupid as my parents assumed. I wasn't the villain in this story. I was the one person who refused to enable their dysfunction, and they couldn't handle losing their primary source of financial support and emotional control. 7 months of silence ended with a single text message that made everything worth it. "We need to talk. It's about legal issues, please." The please was what got me. These people who had humiliated me publicly, manipulated my relatives, and tried to sabotage my career were suddenly polite. But I wasn't interested in talking. I was interested in watching them face consequences without me there to catch them when they fell. Through my lawyer, I learned the full extent of their legal troubles. The IRS investigation had uncovered systematic fraud going back 8 years. They'd been claiming me as an employee while I was working elsewhere, inflating their business expenses, and using my information on loan applications without my knowledge or consent. The federal government wanted their money, plus penalties, plus interest. Plus, they were facing potential criminal charges. Their attorney had reached out to mine, asking if I'd be willing to testify that I'd been a silent partner in the business. Basically, they wanted me to lie to federal investigators to save their asses. My lawyer's response was professionally worded, but essentially said hell no in legal terms. The civil case was just as satisfying. Remember that equipment loan I'd co-signed years ago? When Wilson Hardware and Supply defaulted, the bank came after everyone on the paperwork. Since I'd properly documented my withdrawal from the business before any defaults occurred, I was protected. My parents weren't. The bank seized what was left of their inventory, mostly outdated tools and rusted hardware, and was pursuing them personally for the remaining balance. But the real masterpiece was watching them try to rebuild without understanding how any of their systems had worked. They'd attempted to restart the business under a new name, but without access to their customer database, supplier contacts, or payment processing. They were starting from zero. Except they weren't starting from zero, they were starting from negative, with destroyed credit and pending legal issues. Kevin had tried launching his own spiritual wellness consulting business, which apparently consisted of posting inspirational quotes on Instagram and offering $250 energy alignment sessions. He'd made exactly one sale, to the same church friend who had donated to their GoFundMe. Even the crystal shop had let him go after customers complained about his attitude. The last family gathering I heard about was apparently a complete disaster. Uncle Marcus had hosted Christmas, and the whole thing devolved into finger-pointing and blame. According to Nathan, the conversations went like this. Kevin to Mom, "You ruined my life by not teaching me how to be independent." Mom to Dad. This is your fault for not working harder. Dad to everyone. None of this would have happened if my son hadn't betrayed his own family. Grandma Wilson reportedly stood up and said, "Enough. You all made your choices. Stop blaming everyone else for your problems." According to Nathan, who had become my unofficial family intelligence source, the consensus among relatives was that my parents had brought this on themselves. Even Grandma Wilson, who had initially been sympathetic to their sob story, was reportedly disgusted by their behavior after learning the full truth. The GoFundMe was still up, by the way. Total raised after 9 months, $412. Most of it from people who had later asked for their money back after hearing about the fraud charges. But my favorite update came from my old boss, Mr. Collins. He'd reached out through LinkedIn to let me know that the client from the infamous presentation had actually been impressed by how I'd handled the situation. Anyone can give a good presentation, the CEO had told him. But walking away from toxic people while maintaining your professionalism, that takes real character. The CEO had apparently told his board of directors about the professional who chose integrity over family drama, and how rare that was in business. Mr. Collins offered me a consulting contract at triple my old hourly rate. Apparently, my family drama had become a case study in their office about maintaining boundaries under pressure. The professional vindication felt incredible. 4 months later, that same client reached out directly, asking if I'd be interested in handling their account personally. Turns out my reputation in the industry had actually improved after word spread about how I'd handled the situation. Meanwhile, I was living my best life in a city where nobody expected me to solve their problems with my paycheck. Good job, great apartment, actual work-life balance, and 0 family emergencies draining my bank account. I'd lost the inheritance they'd always dangled as motivation for my loyalty. Turns out it was debt, legal troubles, and a lifetime of guilt trips. I'd rather build my own legacy than preserve theirs. They'd called me selfish, ungrateful, a traitor to the family. But 8 months later, I was the only one whose life had actually improved. Funny how that works when you stop enabling other people's dysfunction and start investing in your own future instead. The family legacy they claimed I'd destroyed? It was never really a legacy at all, just a house of cards built on guilt, manipulation, and other people's money. All I did was stop playing the game and let gravity do the rest. When I told Derek that the whole thing was finally over, his response was perfect. "Dude, you didn't just dodge a bullet. You dodged a whole firing squad. Your family's like a Netflix series that got canceled for being too unbelievable. Sometimes the best family is the one you choose, not the one that chose your bank account." Absolute truth from my very best friend. Max seemed to agree with this assessment. He was lying on his back in a patch of sunlight streaming through the apartment window, legs in the air, looking completely content with our life. For a dog who once had a nervous breakdown because I rearranged the living room furniture, he'd handled our complete life overhaul with surprising grace. Apparently, even dogs know when you've made the right call about cutting toxic people loose. Sometimes the best revenge is living well, while toxic people face the natural consequences of their choices. And that's exactly what happened. I'm thriving in my new career. Max has claimed dominion over our entire apartment, and my former family is still dealing with the mess they created for themselves. The IRS investigation is ongoing. Their business is permanently closed, and they're all working actual jobs for the first time in years. Meanwhile, I wake up every morning in a city where nobody expects me to fund their poor life choices, where my success is my own, and where the only drama in my life comes from Max occasionally getting his head stuck in random containers. I used to think family meant unconditional support, but I learned that real family doesn't try to destroy your career when you set boundaries. Real family doesn't manipulate and guilt trip you into funding their lifestyle. And real family certainly doesn't commit fraud using your personal information. The people who raised me taught me a valuable lesson, just not the one they intended. They taught me that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is walk away and let people face the consequences of their actions. They taught me that my success doesn't obligate me to subsidize other people's failures. And they taught me that chosen family like Derek, Max, and the colleagues who respect my boundaries is worth more than blood relatives who see you as nothing more than a walking ATM. 8 months later, I can honestly say cutting them off was the best decision I ever made. My mental health is better, my finances are better, my career is better, and even Max seems happier now that we're not constantly dealing with family drama. Sometimes you have to burn bridges to stop the wrong people from crossing them. And sometimes the family you choose is so much better than the one you were born into. TLDR. After years of financially supporting my dysfunctional family's failing business and my brother's expensive lifestyle, I finally set boundaries. They responded by trying to destroy my career, so I cut all contact and moved away. Their business collapsed. They're facing fraud charges, and they lost everything while I'm thriving in my new life. Turns out the best family is the one you choose, not the one that chooses your bank account.